craziest thing a filmmaker could do these days is make a movie about Donald Trump. Been there, Trump that, right? I mean, we've had Trump Card, You've Been Trumped, Fahrenheit 11/9, The Plot Against the President, Trump, An American Dream. You know, all these documentaries have a very specific point of view. Trump good, Trump bad, Trump Hitler 2.0. Thank you, Michael Moore. Never change. So I greeted Trump's Rosebud with a little skepticism. Well, more than a little. The film looks at Trump through the lens of Citizen Kane, which is obviously one of the greatest movies ever made. It's also Trump's favorite film. Well, why? Why does that selection matter? And how does Trump's rise, and it's an amazing rise no matter what you think about Trump, how does it relate to Charles Foster Kane, the character in the film Citizen Kane? Well, director Robert Orlando teases all that out with Trump's Rosebud. The documentary promises a fair assessment of Trump. Imagine that. And the media's approach to him. And darned if it hasn't come pretty close to getting it right, as far as the fair part, I'd have to say. Now, could it be tougher on Trump? Absolutely. There's tons and tons of things you can say. But, you know, we've seen a lot of it. We read a lot of it. A lot of it was fake news. Some of it was real. But by gathering up his sycophants and some of his toughest conservative critics, like Bill Barr, what Trump's Rosebud does is offer a new portrait of Trump and where we stand as a culture in 2023.
What the hell is an independent filmmaker doing in the swamp? D.C. Well, it's a long story, but the bottom line is I wanted to find out the truth about one man, Donald Trump. Trump and I had something in common. Our favorite film was Citizen Kane. Since then, I tried to walk away from it all, but couldn't let it go. I needed eyewitnesses. I needed those who knew the man. And one way or the other, I was going to find my Rosebud.
I confess I've been emailing Robert a time or two over the last few weeks. He's a really interesting guy and certainly versatile and writing books, making documentaries. He wrote a couple pieces about Blade Runner for Hollywood and Toto.com that really took off. Plug alert. Sorry, got to do it. I am an entrepreneur. But I recently got the chance to talk with the director of Trump's Rosebud about the film, about his inspiration. And I have to say, I wasn't surprised to find out that Robert is a really keen observer of our political moment. Of course, that political moment ain't pretty, but, you know, that's not his fault. That's just our fault. Now, there's a quick audio hiccup early in the conversation, but the rest of the chat should be as smooth as a gravy sandwich. So no matter what you think about Trump, open your mind, open your heart, and check out this conversation with the director of Trump's Rosebud, Robert Orlando. Robert, thanks for joining the show. You don't need me to tell you that doing a documentary about Donald Trump on the surface sounds like a terrible idea, just because we've seen him so often. We've seen other documentaries. They're often very slanted, obviously. And then you came along with this idea of examining Trump through Citizen Kane. For those who haven't seen the movie yet, just give us a little peek at that mental process, because it is really the way to enter the story in a new and fresh direction.
Yeah, no, it was partly serendipitous. To me, Trump is like the elephant in a room, especially for someone who does biographies and biopics and really gets into character. But he was ever present, ubiquitous. But during COVID, for a period of time, I started watching old movies again just to eat up some of the time in my studio I had in downtown Princeton. And while I was there, I was just going through YouTube or Googling different things around Citizen Kane, and I saw Donald Trump on TV admittedly say it was his favorite film, and even was engaged by another filmmaker some time ago to do it as part of a presentation. So I thought, as a filmmaker who knows Citizen Kane very well, knows Orson Welles very well, this is going to be interesting to see, could we map Donald Trump's career or his life over Hearst or Kane as a way to kind of get to the inside of his Rosebud, if you will.
Sometimes when we make art, it reveals something about ourselves. Sometimes when we say, oh, this is my favorite song or movie, it does the same. It reveals something about ourselves. When Trump picks this kind of a film, obviously it's a great movie. There's no argument there. But do you think he has really thought about the choice? Do you think it's instinctual? Do you think that it speaks on a certain subconscious level that he did select this particular film?
That's a great question, because I've always been suspicious I'm just being totally honest with you. I've always been suspicious whether he's choosing the film because he knows there's a certain
Mhm.
cachet or
Sure.
elegance to my favorite film, Citizen Kane. But I think then I learned I think it goes a little bit beyond that. But having said that, I don't think he understands the film. So what made it even more intriguing to me is the film is a tragedy at the end. It's not the film you emulate or want to be like. The problem of Kane was he should get another woman. So I don't know if he understood the film in depth, and that intrigued me even more to see what does he not understand, but he's still attracted to the film.
Mhm. Yeah, I mentioned that in part because when I was working as a journalist in Pittsburgh a long time ago, we would ask different local politicians some questions about the economy or policy, and then we'd ask them some softball. It was often, "What's your favorite movie?" And it would always stump them, and they always would want to think of an answer that wasn't just their actual favorite, but that's something that really spoke volumes about them, to kind of put themselves in the best light. That's why I was kind of curious about that. You know,
If you had asked me like before, like without reading anything on Trump or his interests on films,
mhm.
I would have thought some would be like Caddyshack, you know. And I think most people would agree with me because a lot of guys like to do what he does, would like Caddyshack. So
He is the ultimate Rodney Dangerfield, kind of crashing the bull in the china shop. The film has a lot of good experts here. I love Steve Deese's input. I think he has a great perspective. I was curious if you, and I want to get to Bill Barr in a moment, but were there any experts that you were hoping to grab for the film that you just couldn't get them? I mean, everyone's busy. It's tough to get any sort of names, as it were, in a film like this. I was curious if there are any that just eluded your grasp.
I could give you a list. As a matter of fact, I thought the punchline at the end to scroll all the names that would not appear in the film. It goes on in the dozens, and I'm saying when I pretty much at this point I'm one removed, or could reach most people at least for a
Sure.
conversation. There's something still toxic either both ways. Either if you're on the left, I'm not hating him enough, and if I'm on the right, I can't step out of line at all. So it was a bit of wearing a bit of a straitjacket even to find the people I did. And I said to them all, like, we're all kind of on the Enterprise together. We're on the same ship. Maybe we don't all get along like the on Star Trek, but we're all like in the ship or flying toward the same destination.
Mm-hmm.
But even with those parameters between like a Bill Barr and a Sebastian Gorka, not everyone plays nice. So,
well, I think what Bill Barr does which is what your film does, and be as fair as humanly possible. And I want to get to that theme in a minute, but let's focus on Bill Barr. His observations are fascinating. I mean, he knows Trump, knows him better than many people, worked alongside him, saw the best and the worst of Trump along the way. Can you share maybe any behind the scenes conversations with Barr or what he brought to the film? I was just fascinated every time the camera was back on him. It just was so interesting, so insightful, and able to share conversations stripped of emotion, which ain't easy, let me tell you.
No, it's not. And I noticed also as an independent thinker and someone who does, as a dramatist, thinks psychologically, that politicians are not good at expressing psychological explanations because they're more about positioning and power and or protection, or even defending or protecting themselves, especially a lawyer like Bill Barr. There was one thing it is funny because filmmaking, it's usually the like after the cut, or it's walking him back to the elevator, or having the drink after the movie where the best stuff is always But he did point to something. I'm going to get some of these details wrong, but he pointed to, I think he was on Air Force Two when he was doing a speech in Alaska, and he had a daughter. I don't know if he want me to give away too many details, but he had a daughter who suffered from a serious condition. And he told me about how in his life, it kind of made him not be able to take himself too seriously. And he made some offhand comment, like on camera, like, hey, someday someone's going to be throwing dirt in my face. And who am I? Like, basically, like, how can I ever be that big of a star? And he got called into Trump's office the next day immediately. And he's saying this with like chuckling, because he was saying it as, and Trump was like, "You're a fatalist, just like I am, Bill. You're a fatalist." And I thought, fatalism, if you listen to the music, is that all there is in the movie? That is Trump's favorite song, according to Google searches and some background work I did. That is favorite song, or he claims it is. But that, if you listen to that song, it's if that's all there is, and it seems like there is a fatalist streak that comes about at some point in his life where, then you're going to get into the deeper psychiatry of it. But that's where I think it starts, from that place.
I think the ultimate challenge of a film like this is, here's a fellow who everyone sees, everyone knows, everyone has an opinion on, and yet at the same time, do we really know him? We see the tics and the features and the grandiosity, but who is this guy? What drives him? I know that's what the film is about, and I don't want to give away too much, but I just think that's a fascinating thing to take the man who is the most exposed person maybe in our culture for I don't know how long, and say, but do we even know him? And I think the curiosity you bring to that question is fascinating and, dare I say, a bit brave. Can you talk about, I mean, you're a biographer, this is what you do, but he just seems like he's what other topic could be more challenging than Donald Trump?
Yeah, no. He, let me riff off your question. I would say, does Donald Trump know who Donald Trump is?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the enigmatic part of him, and people that just continue to draw attention to themselves. It's you wonder if they even know themselves, and then you start projecting into them who you think they are, and then it's like this endless pit you never get out of. And at some point you have to make a judgment call, but in making judgment calls, you're making judgments, and that's when you find who's loyal and who's not, or who can't speak and who can't speak freely. But I go back to the elephant in the room. I just wanted to say, like, has anyone been paying attention to what we've been through for 6 years before we get to what political position and taxes and foreign policy? Like, has anyone, the craziness of the media and what's come out of this entire thing and what we're witness to? Because I feel like the abused child is watching the dysfunctional family fight all day long, but I have no choice. Every channel I turn, I'm watching the same mom and dad work out their problems verbally. Yeah. And it's like, I wanted to take a giant step back, and before tragedy, if it didn't hit already, is going to hit, I wanted to take a step back and say, could we just hold up this mirror in this film for a while and go, what is really going on here? Like, let's take this apart before we make another decision moving forward, because to me, everyone's way behind the ball when it comes to the infiltration of media in our minds.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, this is the kind of project that's often more successful in 10, 20 years, where you can look back at it with a cooler head. And the fact you've been able to do it now, while we're in the heat of this moment, is impressive and rare and necessary. And I think that's one of the things I enjoyed about the film, is that there are different layers and different context modes here, where it isn't just Trump good or bad. It's the media's coverage. It's what's happening in the culture. It's what's happening in the conversation. So it's fascinating. You keep going back to a theme here in the movie, literally, about being fair. And there's a key moment late in the film where it really comes into play, obviously. I won't share more than that. How do you stay fair? Do you have colleagues or people in your life, or who can look at you kind of over your shoulder and say, hey, I don't know, man, I think you're leaning a little bit in this direction or that direction? Because I think that's getting harder to do in our culture. And I think assessing Trump, that might be the most challenging thing in the world, to say, okay, I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be fair about Donald Trump. I mean, you might as well say I'm going to hike a 14er or something crazy. Just how do you keep your balance in the midst of this story?
Well, the easy answer is I have a wife.
Easy and fair. I think it works for me too. But
I'll straighten you out right away and have kids on top of that. You thought you had an ego until you had kids and a wife. But no, I want to go back to something you just said, and you're asking really good questions. I really appreciate your questions. When you were talking about before, you have to love to some degree everyone you treat, even fairly, or you write about. You have to try to fall in love with them, even if they're dark or have a lot of darks or hidden sides, or you don't like, even if you don't like them. I've had to write about people I'm fascinated with that I don't like. I wouldn't want to be them. But with Trump, just quickly, I found that his ambition and his ability to bounce back and reinvent himself on some level, while that's, I forgot the classic, the trickster, the trickster in the mythical world of filmmaking with storytelling. Some of them keep switching coats and hats, but they can become whatever they need to be. like his whole life has been that, to remain in the spotlight. But there's a virtue in ambition too. I mean, so it's not all one without the other. And playing the bad guy that he did, whether it was self-serving also, could also be a byproduct that he is a freewheeling, bold, courageous person. So it could be a mixture thing. So I did have to fall in love a bit with the character to keep it fair. But also, as a filmmaker, I try and be as detached as I can from the type of smaller political choices we make based on issues or being accepted.
Mhm.
And it's the greatest compliment in the world, and you're the first to say it, but I felt like when I was making this film, I was making a film for down the road. Like I
Interesting.
wouldn't, people would not, it really sucked because I wanted some people to say like, this could be helpful at this time. But I felt for the first film ever, I was making a film that we need more time and distance for someone to understand what I'm trying
Mhm.
to say. I was coming from not like what side are you on, but Marshall McLuhan meets Donald Trump in the 2020s, you know?
Interesting. And I also think that the way you describe your approach is a little bit like how actors will approach a villainous role, where they know he or she is the bad person and they know they're going to, chase the hero and do dastardly things. But they always want to get under their skin. They always want to say, okay, why am I doing that as an actor, as a character? And it often makes a much better performance. So that's interesting. I have so many thoughts and issues, and I can't even put it all into words. It just trips my tongue up. But I also will know that the 2023 Trump is not the same as the 2016 model. I think that's pretty clear on a lot of different levels. But I was kind of curious. I never liked this question, but you seem uniquely able to answer it, perhaps. Where does Trump go in 2024? I mean, all these indictments, looks like he's going to likely be the nominee. The media is what the media is. He seems more undisciplined than ever. He seems like he's lost some of his fastball, but yet he can still riff with the best of them. Any thoughts on the future? And you can clearly beg out of this question, because generally speaking, I don't like this question from journalists, but just given the work you've done and the project in question, it seems more fair than usual.
I do have a historical perspectives, and I am a student of history, maybe a bit of an armchair, but I do go to graduate school and study. I do see this at least as the decline of the republic. So the kind of dynamics that come up to play, and if people don't know these subjects well, it could sound like I got to go slow because it's going to sound like offhanded stuff. But when democracy starts to fail and the senators run off as the ruling class, you do get the strong men do show up to kind of for the people. It's the bread and circus moment. And it almost becomes necessity because there is no voice. So when people are muted, and I believe this is in my book and in my first film on Trump, I don't know if I told you, but I tried to make a first film. It's probably in some of my work, like my interviews. But in trying to say to them that he was the voice of a voiceless people, you can never forget that. And when people are what you want to say, neglect is a form of abuse. When people are being abused on either side, but in this case, those who without a voice, without a job, being dismissed, being disrespected, especially in that Rust Belt part of the country with all the loss of jobs going to China, that I thought like he was a mouthpiece for undercurrents that was so much deeper than him. And he picked up on them, and he knew now how sincere he was about that or not. So I see him as, the old saying, is there one Frank Sinatra and he becomes Frank Sinatra? Or is there 100 potential Frank Sinatras, but one is born in the time for there to be a Frank Sinatra? The great men versus the great times argument. I think he's more a product of the media world than he is of himself. So I think the forces that he's stepping on the stage playing. I mean, think about the beautiful transition here. He was, and people get this wrong all the time, but he was an okay businessman, and he was a failure at casinos. And I can go on and on about like someday I'm going to write the tome myself with a lot of medication. I'm going to write the tome, but if you go back, he was until he got to play the executive on television. He never really showcased his real skills, which is performing the role of being something, not
Yeah.
ultimately, I think it was a full circle from his ambition very early to want to be part of the movies.
Yeah.
That was really where it all came back together, because it's not really that he's a great businessman, he's a great salesman. It's that he's a great performer. And it doesn't mean that that's without substance. It's not easy even to sustain a business. Even a failing business is hard to run. We all know this. But I do think that he when he got on the stage and now he had a director, someone to be the executive to his own impulses and everything, I think that's where he found his greatest success.
It's fascinating. You're releasing this film independently. This is not a studio. This is not any sort of distribution company helping you out. You go to a website, trumpsrosebud.com. That's where you get it. Was that a conscious move? Were you rejected by traditional gatekeepers? Can you share a little bit about that and any sort of any part of that success story like that others could replicate it in a sense? Because if someone had a project that they thought, gosh, I don't know how I'm going to get this out there, I'm going to go solo. I was just kind of curious if you have any tips for them as sort of a B to that A question.
This was the true example of cinema verite, because I really, if we got a few minutes, I just got to back up a little bit. But when I didn't want to participate in the cynicism of the 2016. You have to go back 2015, but even before that, just the cynicism of how political and binary the whole system became. Because in my career as an independent filmmaker, I've been around long enough to know that there seemed to be a lot more center ground coming up as a filmmaker, where people had their opinions and they marched and did things, but they understood when you were in like a film space versus a political space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came out of a world where that space dried up and everything became political, and the cynicism was like a disease. So I originally did a film on Reagan and John Paul II and the fall of the Berlin Wall. One, I was just attracted to the subject and found some material that I could riff off of with my own story. That's another long story. Maybe we'll do that in the future. But it was called A Divine Plan because I wanted to show how unity and a faith perspective could bring so much good in the world without needing that combative, cynicism and the constant poison that we were subject to.
Mm-hmm.
But during the whole time, I was competing on the airwaves, trying to promote Reagan and John Paul II. I was competing with Trump. I couldn't get airtime, interviews. I couldn't get. So at some point, I had to turn around and, oh boy, I'm going to have to face this one. Is that it just absorbed all of the oxygen in media, not just him, because when he set up that opposition with the left media, the corporate media, between the two of them, that was news around the clock, 24/7. So when COVID came, it was kind of like a letdown. I can't keep watching the news. I was so sick of watching that conversation that I thought I would go back to kind of escape it all, like go back to a classic approach, watch some black and whites where you lose yourself in a little bit of the escapism, like the 500 people in the room, Capra-esque. And I went back there, but when I went back there, I was like, okay, now I have to face this. Now I have to really, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. And using the comparison of Trump, I wrote a book first called Citizen Trump. And in there, I just wanted to make the sheer comparison, like, would they line up? Would Hearst and Trump line up as media figures who use media for successful or non-successful political careers? Which is yes, they're part of scandals, but the world changed, and there was some matches. Overall, it worked pretty well, but it was a bit too heady.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit too, and I didn't get, because of COVID, I couldn't travel, and it was basically me doing my own first-person narrative or experimenting. But then I finally got to the point where the doors opened again, and I met Bill Barr and a few other people, and I said, "Hey, would you get on camera and tell me the story? I'm not looking to score points here. I'm looking to really tell the story." And I remembered way back his initial biographers, he would always say to them, "You could tell my story, but make sure you tell it and you're fair."
Yeah.
So I kept saying to myself, well, as long as I'm fair, I'm going to just go for this. But it was a very difficult experience. And I did, at one point, my social media people told me that I was getting blocked. My reviews were getting blocked.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was the Lincoln Project, because I was getting blocked from both sides. So I was saying to myself, I must be doing something right. And then I would test the film out. I would do little test screenings, and I noticed it was like in New York, I couldn't hate Trump enough. And if it was like more friendly to Trump, it would be like, why would you say that? Why would you have any critical distance? So in the end, this is not the normal process to do this. It had to come out. But when it does reach an audience, or when I find people like yourself doing interviews, to me, it's the gift that keeps on giving, because film and Trump and media are like, it's what we're looking in the face every single day, like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Robert, before I let you go, I know you're working on different projects all the time. You've got books and documentaries and all these different interesting things you've got on your hopper. What's coming next, or what do you want to talk about? I mean, we don't have time for everything, but I want to give you the chance to focus on one more project and share it and kind of tease it.
Sure. This is going to be a great pivot from you. I'm going to go from Trump to Jesus.
There you go.
So my next film coming out November 20th is The Shroud, Face to Face. It's my first-person journey in light of my father's death to understand the nature of the shroud. Is it real or not? And to see where it leads me. It winds up leading me all the way back to the Holy Land. And I'm very proud of it. And I think it's my best work to date. And it was kind of nice to get out of the political realm and go a little spiritual, more again. But it's theshroudfilm.com. And I hope we follow up on that one soon, because I think I'm very happy with where it is.
Yeah, well, I love your perspectives on culture. Haven't given you as much attention on the spiritual front, but now I think I'll be doing that very soon. So I'm glad that's coming out. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining the show. And of course, everyone needs to check out Trump's Rosebud. If you think you're burned out on Trump, if you think you've read everything, if you think there's no fresh angle, no new way to examine this political figure, well, you're wrong. He proved it, and the movie is really wonderful. I also love the visuals, the black and white imagery. It almost feels like a graphic novel at times. It has a great perspective visually, so I like that about the film as well. Go to trumpsrosebud.com. Simple. You can stream it right there. Easy peasy. And Robert, I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much, Christian. I really enjoy your show.
I am loving these bonus episodes, and I really hope you are too. Please subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast and tell a friend about the show. Yes, it's old school. Yes, it's a throwback to the analog age, but word of mouth still helps. It'll always help. And please be on the lookout for artists these days who are sticking their necks out, telling the stories they want to tell, the jokes they want to share. They need our help now more than ever. That's not hyperbole. Let's support free speech. See you next time.